Today we're looking at a video called Does God Exist, and if so, how can we know? It's an exciting title, I gotta give it credit. It's pedal to the metal from start to finish.
Out of all the videos that I've ever done on this channel, I don't think I've ever answered the question, how can we know for sure that God exists?
Oh, well, I don't blame you. That's not a question I would want to try to answer either.
Rather than hoping that there's a man upstairs.
Why would I hope that? Literally every time I go up a set of stairs, I hope there's not a man up there.
Or a higher power, or a creator, or whoever you want to call him. Like, how can we have some tangible proof that we actually do have a God who exists?
Wait, tangible proof? So you want physical evidence that you can touch and feel? Well, okay, you won't get any objections from me on that. It is kind of surprising because a lot of the time in these Does God Exist videos, they'll present an argument and say, that's proof, which obviously is not tangible. What kind of tangible stuff are we talking about then? Trees are tangible. Are you going to tell me to look at the trees?
So in this video, we are going to give you 6 proofs of God's existence coming up.
Wow, those are going to be pretty breezy. That's just something over a minute for each one. I guess I'll try to keep it kind of breezy too, although we know how that goes.
Hey, my friend, welcome back to The Beat. My name is Alan Parth.
Welcome back? I didn't go anywhere. This is YouTube, not television.
Thank you so much for tuning in. If this is your first time here, it's a pleasure.
Oh. Well, I'm happy to pleasure you, Alan.
If you want to know the entire story of the Bible,
I sure don't.
Click the link in the description box below.
I sure won't.
If you enjoy this video, consider subscribing.
Okay, if that's the condition, I guess I won't end up subscribing either.
Hit that little bell notification so you won't miss a beat.
Ah, you worked the name of the show into the thing there. You're a clever guy, Alan. You're clever.
Okay, so if you've ever wondered the question, I can't see God, I can't smell God, but...
Wait, how do I know if I can't smell God? What if he smells really similar to something else and so I don't know it's him?
How do I know if he really exists or this whole thing that we see in our universe is just happening by chance? So
always the dichotomy between my God exists or it's all happening by chance. It is possible to have more than 2 things in a set.
Here are 6 proofs that I want to give you, and 2 of them come from the Bible and the other 4 do not.
I bet those Bible ones are gonna rip ass, which I think it's supposed to be positive, right? Yeah, I think so. But yeah, obviously they're going to be great because they're the ones God chose to put in his word. Like, those are the premier arguments that God was like, listen, these are the best of the best, the cream of the cream. I don't even know why you bother with other ones. You've already got these ones directly from God himself. They should be so mind-expandingly awesome that they insta-convert anyone who lays eyes on them.
The first proof is what we'll call an internal witness. Now, this is the idea that deep down inside of every single human being...
Oh my God, dude, no. Don't do it.
There is this deep internal sense that there must be a God who exists.
Oh, Alan, why? And you decided to lead with this. You didn't even bury it somewhere in the middle as one of the mediocre ones. Bro, this is... no.
I want you to notice here what Paul says about unbelieving Gentiles, not Christians, unbelievers in Romans chapter 1. He says in verse 21, for although they knew God. So let's stop right there.
Yeah, good timing, Al. I was going to say the same thing, because it's interesting what we're seeing on the screen here. First off, you say this is Romans 12, verse 21 and 25, but this has nothing to do with Romans 12. In fact, Romans 12 only has 21 verses. The text you show is from Romans chapter 1. And in Romans 1, this text is from verses 21 and 25. True, because you've taken the first part of verse 21 and mashed it together with the first part of verse 25 and manufactured your own verse without adding ellipsis or anything to indicate that you've cut something out. It seems weirdly disrespectful to God's word or even Paul's word to chop it up into little pieces and put it back together in some other way you prefer. So let's quickly just have a look at what it actually says. Verse 21 says, for although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. So you said he's talking about unbelieving Gentiles. No, he's not, or at least not atheists, which is what you're trying to imply. Unbelieving Gentiles in the sense that they are unbelievers in his religion, but still religious theists. For context, this directly follows those verses about people suppressing the truth and people being without excuse because of how supposedly obvious it is what God is like, what his nature nature is, what his invisible qualities are, what can be known about him. So yes, this constitutes an outright denial of the possibility of atheists, but that's not who he's talking about. He's talking about people who refuse to recognize what God is really like. In other words, people who don't believe in his God, specifically. In other words, pagans. Now, of course, pagan is not a term Paul would have used or understood. This is a word that came quite a bit later than Paul, and quite a bit later than that acquired the meaning that medieval Christians would recognize it having, which really just means non-Christian and non-Jewish and typically polytheist. So I'm using it as a shorthand for the Greek and Roman and Egyptian and Middle Eastern religions that Paul was likely whining about. Just everyone who believes in a different God than he does, in a fairly silly way that groups them all together inappropriately and gives them a derisive name, which I'm sure Paul would have been proud of, and I can almost guarantee he would have used if he'd had the chance. Now, these people know what God is like. What may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, so that people are without excuse. So they know that the Christians and Jews are right about God, and they've always known it since the creation of the world, but they don't worship him, and so they start making images and worshiping those. And because of that, God gives them over to sexual impurity, which is specified a couple verses later as gay stuff, which I think is Paul just dunking on pagans. Like, pagans are gay, bro. This guy would for sure be a comment troll in 2024. And I don't think Paul read this back before he sent it out, by the way, because this is kind of repetitive. Like, verse 23 basically says they made images of stuff that wasn't God and worshipped them. And then verse 24 says they did bad sex stuff. And then verse 25 says they worshipped stuff that wasn't God. And then verse 26 says they did bad sex stuff. It's like his brain reset and he felt compelled to repeat the thing he just said. It's on paper. Just read it back, maybe combine the stuff that's repetitive into one thought, rewrite the letter, a final version. A few people are going to be reading this for a while. You could put a bit more effort in. God could inspire a bit more effort. Anyway, so as far as your cutting this up and putting it back together, does your cut and paste job itself misrepresent the meaning of it? No, not really. The exchanging the truth about God for a lie part does kind of fall under the umbrella of the although they knew God part. And Paul does like to waffle on. I can understand why you'd want to cut out some of the fluff.
He says that unbelievers, deep down in their spirit, they know God. They know there has to be a God out there somewhere.
Yeah, I know. In Going for the Pagans, he does indirectly deny the existence of atheists. Paul was a cult-brained idiot. What does that have to do with whether God exists?
Now, look at verse 25. What do they do with it? They exchanged the truth about God for a lie.
Yeah, and for butt stuff too, apparently. And for worshiping images of human beings, birds, animals, and reptiles. Again, kind of a repetitive writer.
So at some point, an unbeliever, they know in their heart there's a God. They may not believe in Jesus. They may struggle with this idea of there being a Savior on the cross who died and resurrected and miracles and fed 5,000. I get that. Okay, fine. But deep down inside, even unbelievers have a sense that there is a God, and they exchange that truth for a lie.
Yeah, but unbelievers specifically meaning the pagan unbelievers in Judaism and Christianity. The pagans exchanged the truth for a lie. The lie is paganism. Hence why he mentions idol worship. But, so the first argument for God then is Paul insisted that atheists already believe that. And therefore, what? Am I supposed to suddenly decide I actually do believe that? Okay, and if I do that, then what? If I decide I believe God exists, that doesn't mean God exists. And if, because I believe it, I decide that must mean everyone else does too, that still doesn't mean God exists. Your entire argument here is just Paul said so. I'm sure all the Christians will clap. What's that supposed to do for the rest of us?
Now, how would they know that internally and intrinsically?
Well, because that's what a belief is. It's accepting something as likely true. It's the opinion that it's likely true. If you don't have that, you neither know it nor believe it. If somebody says something to you, and you think to yourself, nah, I don't believe that, that's bullshit, then you don't believe it. So when you assert that atheists do in fact believe this, knowledge of course being just a form of belief, you're implicitly asserting that whenever any atheist hears God mentioned, the atheist agrees with the statement internally, then goes, oh no, I have to push that down somehow, which is wonderful if you're talking to a bunch of idiot Christians with no theory of mind who don't understand that other people think different thoughts. But in that case, why even make this video? The dumbass Christians who are going to believe you already believe you, nobody else is going to believe you, and if you're you're right, arguing for God is pointless because everyone already believes you. Even arming the Christians with arguments for why God exists is pointless because, again, everyone already believes it, right? It has to intentionally pretend otherwise so that they can keep on worshipping Audubon Society field guides. You're presenting this as the first of 5 arguments for why God exists, but even mentioning this one means that every other one is totally superfluous. You might as well just stop here.
Well, verse 19 says, since what may be known about God is plain to them.
Again, you show Romans 12 when you meant Romans 1. Apparently you didn't catch it this time either.
Why? Because God has made it plain to them. So basically, Paul is saying...
Yeah, see, Paul said so. Paul said it, therefore God. Or rather, therefore I don't need no arguments. Just admit you already believe me, you filthy heathen. Like, your first argument for God isn't even an argument for God. It's for a different thing altogether. The level of failure here is incredible.
If you just look around, it's very crystal clear that...
I made a joke about you telling me to look at the trees, but I think that's actually what you're doing right now.
God has done whatever he has needed to do to give every single human being proof of his own existence.
As long as they're willing to take, therefore God, as absolute proof. You say look around, it's very crystal clear that God has done whatever he needs to do to give every single human being proof of his own existence, but how is that crystal clear? Like, aside from the fact that a shrug is not an argument, if I look around, I see a lot of atheists, I see a lot of Hindus, I see a lot of Buddhists, I see a lot of all kinds of different people who are not Christian. In Paul's time, there were pagans everywhere, but Paul's claim, and your claim, is that it's absolutely clear that God has made not just his existence, but his specific nature as the Judeo-Christian God clear to everyone. And that's not clear at all, which is part of why Paul wrote this. This is explaining away the inconsistency of the real world with his belief. What seems clear from looking around the world at the people is that many people don't find it very clear at all that God exists or that his nature is what you claim it is. And Paul's only excuse for this is, no, it really is, trust me. They just won't admit it. They're just being stubborn. So looking around indicates the opposite of what you said. This is dumb as hell.
He's made it plain. God has made it so plain that the Bible says in Psalm 14:1, a fool says in his heart there is no God.
Whoa, somebody called someone else an idiot? But you can't say that unless it's true, right? That's like illegal or something. That's why no idiot with a wrong belief ever called someone else an idiot on the internet.
And so the second proof we'll call the external witness. And this is the idea that not only has God placed it in the heart of every person, deep down intrinsically, that they know that there has to be a God somewhere out there, but now God has left enough proof externally, specifically in nature, to be able to look around and anyone with any rational thought should be able to come to the conclusion that, oh, okay, well, because I see this and because this works this way and because...
Okay, just stop for a second. This is the same argument as the last one, that God has made it plain that he exists, that God has done everything he needs to do to convince everyone that he's real. It's the same thing you just got done saying.
And because we have enough sunlight and we have enough rainfall...
Wait a minute. Life exists on a life-supporting planet, not a non-life-supporting planet? No way. Why don't we live on a non-life-supporting planet? There's so many more of those. The odds must be astronomical that things are alive in the place where things can be alive.
And the fact that these stars aren't falling down on the ground and...
Sorry, what?
And the fact that these stars aren't falling down on the ground and...
What do you think stars are?
And the moon and the sun are spinning around.
Can we do look at the trees instead? It's better somehow.
And the body heals itself whenever we get cut.
Okay, at least that one's in the realm of biology. Close enough.
And all these different things, right? God says, I've left enough proof for you to know that I exist.
It's kind of weird that people in the Bible have to keep writing this down and insisting that it's the fact, almost as if somebody might disagree with it. You know, if you and I and everybody else who ever lived actually believes God exists, the Bible doesn't have to argue that he does, or that it's obvious that he does. There's nobody to convince.
He says once again in Romans chapter 1, verse 20.
We're sticking with Romans 1, really? We're not even going to switch it up. You just got done saying God says this. God says, I've left enough proof for you to know that I exist. But then you just go right back to the same letter written by Paul. Could you quote God saying it at least? Well, if nothing else, at least this time you didn't write Romans 12.
For since the creation of the world, God's, here it is, invisible qualities, number 1, his eternal power, number 2, and divine nature, number 3, have been what? Clearly seen, being understood from what has been made so that people are without excuse.
Exactly. God's qualities have been clearly seen so that the pagans are without excuse for worshiping other stuff. And again, I'm not saying that makes you wrong to use this verse for this purpose. Obviously, if God's qualities are implied by everything in the universe, then that would mean his existence is too, which does make this applicable to atheists as well. I'm just pointing it out because a lot of the time Christians seem to think for some reason that this is meant to be directed at atheists specifically.
God says, listen, when you stand before me one day, I get the fact that you may struggle with understanding who Jesus is and him dying on the cross, but you won't be able to stand before God one day and say, well, God, I just didn't know that you existed, right?
Well, God didn't say anything there. Again, that was Paul. You haven't quoted God. This is Paul giving his religious opinions. Also, in no way does this indicate that God's going to be understanding about you struggling to understand Jesus dying on the cross. Now you're just saying your religious opinions and putting them in God's mouth, no less.
He's left enough proof so that man will be without excuse.
Such as that stars don't fall down on your head. Apparently. Okay, those were the two from the Bible, right? We're done with the Bible ones now, I hope?
Okay, so now these next four proofs are what we'll call the traditional proofs that people have given over hundreds of years, centuries of years.
Oh, great. So we're going stock standard, are we? Not even trying for originality here. That's cool. Well, I can pretty much predict what they're going to be then, and they won't be that much better than it's true because Paul said, but they'll be a little better.
And the first one we'll look at is what's called the cosmological argument, and this word comes from the idea of cosmos, or the universe. Now, I'm going to go ahead and read an excerpt from Wayne Grudem's systematic theology book.
Oh, we're going for the classy sources. None of this William Lane Craig stuff. We're going for the 1,600-page tome. That'll make it more better.
Which describes it in this way. He says, every known thing in the universe has a cause. Therefore, it reasons the universe itself must also have a cause. And the cause of such a great universe can only be God.
All right. I have to be clear here before we go on. I have not read systematic theology. It's just not going to happen, okay? I got too much more useful stuff to read. But I'm not here to argue with Wayne Grudem anyway. I'm here to argue with Alan Parr. And so what Alan chooses to show and what Alan chooses to say stands on its own as his argument, and that's what I respond to. And the reason I point that out is that this quote could have pages and pages and pages of argumentation preceding it, and who knows, maybe that would justify some of what's said here, but it's not here. These two sentences on their own read like a fallacy of composition. In other words, that which is true of the part is true of the whole. Things that we observe in the universe have a cause. Therefore, the universe itself does too. Well, that's just extending from the human frame of reference to something where potentially it could be radically inapplicable. You know, people talk about how God is incomprehensible and so far beyond human understanding. Well, I don't understand why you think that would not apply to the universe or the nature of reality as well. Already, it's pretty obvious that things at very small scales or very fast speeds or anything about the nature of time, for example, are pretty much beyond any intuitive human understanding. And that, whether we realize it or not, is stuff that we experience every day. We're trapped in this stunted little perspective. To assume that you know the nature of the universe and its origin and reality because of not just an understanding of how things work within the universe, but a millennia-old classical understanding of how things intuitively seem to a human to work on Earth specifically is staggeringly arrogant. How have the past few centuries not served as a lesson in intellectual humility? And of course, the fact that it then goes on to say, and the cause of such a great universe can only be God, compounds the arrogance even further. But if this somehow satisfies you, go nuts, I guess.
Now, let me just kind of break that down in layman's terms.
It is in layman's terms.
Let's just say we have this phone right here.
Do you have to choose the phone? It's always like a phone or a pencil or a table. I feel like we need to broaden out our range of examples.
Well, as we look at this phone had to have a cause of some sort.
Yes, I understand what was being said. As I said, it was written in layman's terms. In fact, it could not have been written more simply.
Something had to cause this phone to be here, right? Or this cup right here, or these glasses right here.
Ah, thank you, Alan. I appreciate you indulging me. Thank you.
Something had to cause this to come into existence. And so if we keep tracing the cause back and say, okay, well, what caused the plastic to be on this set of glasses? Okay, then what caused the plastic to be able to be created, or what caused the resistors in here to be able to be created. And we keep tracing that cause and that cause back to that cause. And who caused that? What caused that? We're basically going to end up with a universe with nothing in it except stars, sun, moon, or whatnot.
And then once we're back to just having stars, sun, moon, and whatnots, then the natural chain of causation ends? We didn't go back further than that? Oh boy.
And then at this point, we have two options.
Of course we do. We always have only two options, apparently.
Option one, God caused the universe that we have today.
Well, no, you said we can trace the chain of causation all the way back to the time when there was literally nothing else in the universe other than the stars, the sun, the moon, and the whatnots, which actually doesn't sound that distinct from now. I'm guessing that all you mean is that the universe was dead. It had all the stuff, it just didn't have the life, right? And you said we can get back to that point by following the chain of natural causation, by saying what caused this, and what caused that cause, and what caused that cause. And so if we've done that, then God causing the universe that we have today isn't really an option if you mean God caused the universe as it is today. If you just mean he caused the universe and the universe is the same universe today that it was back then, okay, confusing phrasing, but I can accept it.
If you get to that conclusion that God is the source and the cause of everything, then you've already gotten to the place that you need to be.
So do you believe that God caused the universe with the sun and the moon and the stars and the whatnots all in place already? That's the starting point? And you think stars are something that could fall on your head if God didn't make them not do that? I guess implying that they're like light bulbs in the firmament, maybe? So you're like real into this Christian stuff, huh? A lot more than I thought you'd be.
Now, the other possibility in terms of how we got our universe is this idea of the Big Bang Theory.
I see. So we have a dichotomy between God did it or the Big Bang happened. So yeah, I guess Alan isn't one of those people who think God could have done the Big Bang. Based on these two choices, it's actually impossible to be one of those. Those people don't exist either. And a lot of people with a lot of different ideas seem to just not exist for Alan.
But then you're stuck there because if you go with that route, then you have to come up with some sort of conclusion or explanation, if you will, on what caused the Big Bang.
Well, yeah, it's an event that appears to have occurred, or to be occurring, or however you want to put that. You're going to think about questions like causation, sure. And maybe that's a question with a coherent answer that humans are capable of wrapping our heads around. I don't know. But if it is, does that same thing apply to some natural fundamental reality? I don't know, and neither do you.
And then you have to come up with the explanation of who was the person who actually caused it.
So you've given us a dichotomy and insisted that we have to choose one of two options, one of which is someone did it, and the other one of which is someone did it. I see no reason to think anyone did it. Are you going to give me any reason to think there's a who involved? Or are you just going to keep saying there is? I don't know, dude. It's not very convincing when you say it. Maybe you should quote Paul again.
And then who was the person who created the two things or however many things that came together to make the Big Bang?
Two things that came together? And someone had to do it. So like some guy mixing together a two-stage epoxy? Your ideas about cosmology seem fascinating.
And so if you keep tracing those things back...
Wait, but how can I trace any of this back? Apparently the trail ran cold with the sun and the moon and the stars and the whatnots.
You'll ultimately get back to there has to be a cause for this, and that cause is God, who we call the uncaused cause.
Okay, why is it God? Because you said it had to be a who? Well, yeah, that's it. Alan says it's a who, therefore it's God. How could you not be convinced?
Okay, so the fourth argument is called the teleological argument, and that comes from the word telos, which is from the idea of end or purpose. Now, this argument, basically, I'm going to read back from Wayne Grudem's Systematic Theology book.
Just say it in your own words, Al. It's not that hard. How is this going to be any different, really, from it's real obvious that God made all the stuff, because, like, look at it all. That's what the first two arguments were. This isn't going to make that any different or any better.
And he says it focuses on the evidence of harmony, order, and design in the universe, and argues that its design gives evidence of an intelligent purpose.
Yeah, it's how'd that get there, huh? Looks like someone made it to me. Therefore, God. You seriously telling me you couldn't come up with a way to explain that yourself?
So the idea of this is one I love.
Why?
Basically, the idea is if you look at the universe that we have today, it necessitates that there had to be an intelligent design or designer.
No, I disagree. There doesn't appear to be any necessity for that at all. Please tell me you're not just going to take that part for granted. But of course, I guess you can, because really, I know this already, right? That was the first argument. I already agree with the teleological argument, apparently. So why are you still talking?
That everything that we see didn't just come from happenstance, right?
No, I agree. Physical causation is not just happenstance. When you drop a ball, it doesn't fall to the floor just by happenstance.
The sun being in a position that it is, it's not just happen. It doesn't just happen to be there.
The sun's position. Relative to what?
If it was further away, we would freeze up. If it was closer, we would burn up.
Oh, its position relative to us. Okay, yeah, if it was way, way closer, we would burn up. If it was way, way further away, we would freeze. In either case, maybe life never would have started on this planet. If something else happens, then something else happened. It's like suddenly realizing, wait a second, if my parents never met, then I wouldn't exist. Then how do I exist? What are the odds? Well, if you exist, then your parents have to have met, despite that having a low probability. And if we exist on Earth, then Earth has to support life, despite that having a low probability. But the fact that either of those things is true is only surprising if you think things were driving specifically towards you, or specifically towards Earth life. In other words, we were predicted in advance. We were the goal in some weird way, which again is just more arrogance. Any low probability event that occurs that leads up to you was forced to occur to ensure the birth of Alan Parr. What makes you think this? Just the fact that you're special to yourself? And why does that have to have relevance beyond yourself?
There is an intelligent design that placed that sun right in the ideal situation. There's an intelligent design that knows just how much rainfall needs to come down on this earth.
Yeah, see, you already said this. This was your second argument. What's next? Are you going to repeat the part about the stars falling on your head?
Where if it's too much, we'll drown. If it's not enough, we won't be able to survive.
Well, that happens in many, many places on the earth. People do drown, and they do fail to survive. Just not everywhere, all the time. But yes, if the entire earth was a waterless wasteland, sure, humans would not survive. And if the entire world was an ocean, humans would not survive. Of course, in the latter case, something probably would survive. The oceans are the liveliest place on the planet. But yes, life forms adapted to certain conditions live in places that meet those certain conditions.
There's an intelligence going on that's sustaining everything. Now let's break it down into simpler terms.
Simpler? How? Stuff alive and not dead. No God, stuff no alive is dead. So God then.
Let's once again go back to the cell phone.
Oh yeah, please, I love cell phone examples.
This cell phone is made of batteries, resistors, capacitors, and who knows what else. Plastic, if you will.
I will, yes, thank you.
Whatever. So if I just take a whole bunch of parts from a store, if you will.
I guess I will again. Thank you.
Radio Shack.
Wow, apparently Radio Shack is still a thing somehow. Who knew?
I get a whole bunch of parts, batteries, resistors, and I throw them all in this cup.
We're doing the 747 in a junkyard thing with your coffee cup. Everybody's heard this one. Do we have to do this one?
And I just shake them up, shake them up.
Shake them, shake them, shake them up.
Right? If I'm not going to be able to take all those parts out and, whoa, pops a cell phone that I can call people all across the world, right?
Nah, it'd call the next town over at best. What do you think this is analogous to at all in anything anyone else ever said besides other Christians making the same dumb argument?
It doesn't work like that, right?
Yeah, I know. Who said it did? You're arguing with an empty room.
So this idea of just throwing things together and causing them to bang together doesn't necessarily result, or will not result, in something that is going to work.
Right. I'm not going to bother responding to this until you tie it in some way to something somebody actually proposes for how the universe works.
Right? So the idea is that as we look at our world, as we look at even childbirth, how our
making kids does involve banging things together, but not like you showed.
Bang together are how babies are born, the miracle of childbirth. And
okay, not a miracle. That's a biological process. And biological processes are not just things randomly banging around in a cup. What is this pointless crap you're rambling, Alan?
All sorts of other things. There has to be an intelligent designer that is behind all these things that are making it work.
Because apparently biology is analogous to you buying a bunch of inert metal and plastic parts from Radio Shack and jangling them around for a while in a cup. This video sucks ass.
Now, the fifth argument is what's called the moral argument.
We're only on number 5. I feel like I've been here all day. How are we only on number 5?
And this is the idea that basically inherent in every single person who has ever existed is this idea of right and wrong.
I think that's too bold of a claim that every person that's ever existed has that. But yeah, it's a pretty common human idea. Most people do have ideas about things that they think all people either should do or should not do. It makes perfect sense as a matter of survival that there are certain types of actions that tend to be very widely disapproved of. And these tend to be the things that people take most seriously. The examples people always bring up of murder and so on. But it also makes sense that people take a moral stance on things that aren't nearly so extreme. And the survival benefit of that kind of thinking can be more along the lines of avoiding health problems or maintaining social cohesion within the tribe or other things that aren't matters of imminent life or death but are still important.
Now, do some people go against their own conscience and do wrong? Of course, we all do.
So are we denying the existence of psychopaths here? Very possible.
But inherently, let's be honest, we all have a common sense of certain things being right and certain things being wrong.
So it's not so much the argument from morality as the argument from common sense?
We understand that it is wrong to molest a child. We understand that it is wrong to take the innocent life of somebody. We understand all these things are wrong. Where did that come from?
Well, I kind of just pointed it out. I mean, a society that puts up with that stuff is not going to survive very long, is it? A social species of organisms that tolerate stuff like that as a matter of course is going to have a real problem, and it probably won't last that long, at least as a social species. Again, it's this human-centric, self-centric thinking. You think a certain way, or you and a bunch of other people think a certain way. Therefore, that way of thinking must have some cosmic relevance. The therefore God conclusion here requires you to accept that. It's one of the premises of the argument. So walk me to this premise, justify it. And I'm not saying you can't. I'm not saying it's necessarily false or something. It could be true. I don't think it is. I don't even really understand how it would be, but I guess it could be. But for me to come along with you to therefore God, I first have to think it is true. And then, of course, move on to a few other things too before we get to God, but we got to start somewhere.
Where did this idea of this is right and no, this is wrong come from? It had to have come from God.
Okay, I feel like you're jumping the gun, but all right, I'll play along. Why?
Because if it didn't come from God, then that means that every single person on earth would have their own separate standard of morality.
Well, they do. People do have their own moral opinions. I mean, sure, there's overlap, but there's overlap on pretty much every opinion. Like, I'm sorry, are you not aware of anything? Modern politics, differences between religions, history? Have you never had an argument at the Thanksgiving dinner table? Like, what are you talking about? Humans don't have different standards.
Versus there being a general common morality that is shared amongst all human beings.
Right, which there is not. Again, there are some broad strokes that cultures tend to have in common to some degree or another. And of course, people from the same culture tend to be quite similar, usually, and that's about where it ends.
And that could have only come from a morally perfect being, i.e. God.
If everybody believed the same thing about morality, if they all had the same standard, why? Wouldn't that just mean that our ideas are a matter of neurological development and we tend to all develop pretty much the same neurologically, like with not a lot of neuroplasticity? That's not how we are, obviously, which is why we're so different as people. But it's not like it's not possible. The brain is an organ, just like any other organ in your body. A species with a brain with a much more predictable static structure is not some kind of impossibility. It's just not what we are. But if we were that, apparently you think that that would imply that our morality would be perfect. Because if we all share a standard, that must mean that that standard was placed there by a morally perfect being, and therefore any shared standard is necessarily morally perfect, which I find considerably more than dubious. And then you extend that to therefore that being is God just because, which makes the argument ultimately just 'cause I said so, which is starting to feel like a pattern.
Okay, and the sixth and final proof is a difficult one to wrap your mind around, and it's the ontological argument.
Okay, so again, I'm going to let Alan make the argument however he wants to make it, and I'm going to reply to it the way he makes it. I'm not going to help him. The ontological argument can be made in a way that it becomes at least a little bit annoying to pull apart. But this is Alan Parr, so I don't see that happening.
And the idea here is if you can imagine some great maximal being, if you will, right?
Okay. great maximal being. So he's purple, purple being objectively the best color, being the combination of red and blue, of course. In fact, he's maximally purple. He's the most purple of anything. He maximally smells like a millipede, because of course a millipede is the greatest of all foods and the greatest of all smells. And he's maximally annoyed at religious arguments, because of course that is the greatest of all perfections in a person.
If you can imagine that being in your mind that can do all these things, that's all powerful, all knowing, that is all sovereign and in control of all things.
So it's a being with the maximum of the characteristics that you personally respect, or at least that you think you should respect. You don't seem to care that much about knowledge, really. Okay, well, already my being looks very different from yours, because of course I picked different stats to max. But you know, I'm sure they can live together in harmony. They can work something out.
But if that being only exists in your mind and you're only able to just imagine him, but he doesn't really exist, then that means by default, he can't be the maximum being, i.e. God.
Well, if you consider existence to be some sort of a trait, akin to power level and knowledge quantity, which is questionable, and you consider that to be the max level on some scale of greatness, then yeah, when you imagine your maximally great guy, you're probably going to imagine him with the trait of existing. You're going to imagine him really existing, in fact. But see, your imagination doesn't create reality. You're not a wizard.
There has to be another being out there that is greater than the one that you've actually imagined.
Okay. Why?
Because now this being not only exists in your consciousness, but also exists actually in reality as well.
So you say there has to be this super god that not only exists in your mind, but also exists in reality. Okay, why? Unless you're planning to clarify this, again, this is just because I said so. You're not even really making the ontological argument. You're just sort of saying words that kind of relate to it, but the argument part is missing.
And so therefore, there has to be a greater God. If there, basically the argument is this.
Yeah, back up, take another swing at it. Good plan.
If you can imagine that there is a possibility of there being a God, then that means there has to exist the fact that there is a God.
Okay. Why? You've summarized what argument you would like to make, so where is it? Because I don't want to spoil anything, but we're moving on now. We're done with this. That's all he has to say about this. He basically gave like a Wikipedia first paragraph style summary of it, and then pretended like he made the argument. This video is a disaster. Holy shit. I didn't think it'd be this bad when I went into it. This guy has 1,250,000 subscribers. Astonishing. Now granted, this video is 4 years old. That's a fair amount of time to improve as an apologist. One can hope.
Yeah, I know. That's a tough one to wrap your mind around. I get it.
Yeah, I'm thinking you might have had some trouble with that one yourself, eh?
Okay, my friend, so there are 6 proofs of God's existence.
Are there? I wouldn't even say there were 6 arguments. Some of them were basically just repeats, and you didn't even make an argument in the last one.
Can we touch him? Can we feel him? Can we smell him? Not necessarily.
But it is possible. Come to me, God.
But God has left enough proof internally as well as externally of his existence.
Okay, Alan, that's nice. Oof. Okay, well, thank you for watching. If you would, before you go, please do give the video a like and click subscribe if you haven't. And if you like the channel, maybe consider supporting. A couple of bucks per video or per month is enormously helpful, and huge thanks to all of my supporters who've already made that choice. Email list is back on. Go sign up for early access, list.logicked.com, and I'll see you next time.